They fired him for an accident he didn't cause. They took his job, his reputation, and almost his will to fight. They bet everything on one assumption, that he would never see the footage that proved they were lying. Hirges, quem, ideologicamente, atacamos, are not the injured, but the powerful who prey on them. This is how the court used his own CCTV to give him his life back. Every story has a beginning. For Michael Rowe, it began not with a mistake, but with a moment of sheer, unavoidable misfortune. He was a good worker. A forklift operator with a spotless record, known for his caution, not for his risks. The company ledger would show 7 years of perfect attendance, of signed safety checklists, of being the guy you could count on. But none of that matters when a sealed drum of industrial solvent, improperly secured by a different crew on a different shift, decides to rupture. On October 26th at 10:14 a.m., Michael's life split into a before and after. The before was the man he was. The after was the man his employer would try to create. A liability. A negligent employee who caused his own downfall. This is the real fraud. Hirges, quem, ideologicamente atacamos, are not just the individuals who fake injuries, but the cold, corporate machinery that treats honest workers as disposable assets, that manufactures narratives to protect the bottom line, forcing the honest payer to fight for the justice they already deserve. The incident itself was a blur of shock and chemical exposure. A geyser of corrosive liquid, a frantic evasion that twisted his knee against the forklift step, the searing pain in his lungs. The initial response was almost textbook. Medics were called. A report was filed. For a few days, it seemed the system would work as intended. But then, the silence from HR became deafening. Instead of a workers' comp claim form, he received a summons to a disciplinary meeting. The narrative had already been written behind closed doors. He was being framed not for the accident itself, but for its cause. The company's internal investigation, a sham of selective interviews and omitted context, concluded that Michael had failed to perform a visual inspection of the load, a protocol that was, in practice, impossible to fulfill from the operator's cabin. They called it a violation of safety protocol. In reality, it was a premeditated corporate assassination of his character. They weren't just denying a claim. They were building a case to fire him, to make him the villain of their story. But why? The motive is always the same. It's cheaper to fire one employee for cause than to pay for a long-term injury claim, to have their safety record blemished, to see their insurance premiums rise. It is a cold, calculated business decision, and it relies on one crucial assumption, that the worker is powerless, that he cannot fight back, that the word of a corporation will always outweigh the word of a single man. This is the moment where the real battle begins. Not in the warehouse, but in the shadows of paperwork and legal threats. This is where they make their first and fatal miscalculation. They assumed Michael would simply go away. They assumed he wouldn't find the key to the entire case, a key they themselves had created and desperately tried to hide. Hey, this story's stirring up some outrage on your side of the screen, isn't it? If it is, do me a crucial favor. Comment which state you're watching from, and tell me the exact moment that made your blood boil the most in this case. That way, I'll know you're truly connected to our mission, exposing these fraudsters and bringing justice to light. And listen to this. 96.3% of the people following these investigations still aren't subscribed to the channel. If you're not part of that group, I'm inviting you to subscribe right now. It's completely free, and you'll keep getting the most explosive stories of fraudsters being exposed straight to your feed. Also remember, at the end of this video, you'll find even more shocking cases waiting for you on your screen. So, what does this corporate playbook of denial actually look like? It starts with isolation. Michael was told not to discuss the incident with his colleagues. His immediate supervisor, a man who had previously praised his diligence, was suddenly unavailable for comment. The narrative was being controlled and contained. The second step is reinterpretation. The company's safety manual, a document filled with theoretical absolutes, was wielded like a weapon. They latched onto a single, obscure clause, about load integrity verification and argued that Michael, from his seated position 3 meters away, should have identified a microscopic hairline fracture in a sealed container. It was a standard designed to be impossible, now being used as a justification for ruin. This was the glaring red flag. It wasn't an investigation, it was a script. And the final act was the termination letter. Failure to adhere to core safety principles resulting in significant property damage and personal injury. They fired him by email. They took his job, his income, and his dignity, all while he was on prescribed painkillers for the injury they claimed he never had. They thought the gavel drop had sounded on his career. But they were wrong. The real reckoning was just beginning, and it would be found not in their memos, but in the unblinking eye of their own security system. The termination letter wasn't the end. It was the spark. Michael Rowe, cornered and facing financial ruin, made a decision that would define the rest of this story. He fought back. His attorney's first move was a formal demand for evidence, a request that included all CCTV footage from the warehouse for the hour surrounding the incident. This is where the corporation's mask of procedural compliance began to slip. Their response was a masterclass in obfuscation. They provided a single, carefully edited clip from the camera inside Michael's forklift cabin. It showed his hands on the controls, his face, and then his reaction to the rupture. It was designed to frame the narrative around his personal response, not the cause. The cover-up had begun. This was the moment the case transformed from a simple wrongful termination suit into something far more sinister. The initial red flag had just exploded into a blazing signal fire. The principle of proof before hype was no longer a guideline. It was a battle cry. The corporate playbook of denial had entered its most aggressive phase, evidence suppression. When Michael's legal team specifically requested the wide-angle footage from the overhead gantry camera, the one that would clearly show the entire loading bay and the compromised drum, the company's lawyers responded with a baffling claim. They stated the footage was not available due to a routine data archiving cycle. It was a transparent lie, a digital age, the dog ate my homework. This is a classic tactic: delay, deny, and hope the other side runs out of money or willpower. They were betting that a fired forklift operator couldn't sustain a prolonged legal war against their deep pockets. But this arrogance was their second critical mistake. By so blatantly withholding evidence, they all but confirmed its existence and its importance. They weren't just defending a position, they were hiding the truth. The fraud files weren't about a fraudulent injury, they were about a fraudulent defense constructed by the company itself. This is the wall they put up. This is the moment where most people give up. The cost, the stress, the sheer weight of a corporation telling you no. But this is also the moment that separates a simple complaint from a quest for justice. If you've ever been told it's not worth the fight, then you understand exactly what was at stake here. What happened next is a lesson in legal leverage. The refusal to provide the footage triggered the legal equivalent of a sledgehammer, a subpoena. A judge, presented with the sequence of events, the injury, the termination, the selective evidence, and the dubious excuse about archiving, compelled the company to surrender all relevant footage. The CCTV receipts were now a court-ordered mandate. The corporation could no longer hide. The digital witness, silent for months, was finally being brought to the stand. The discovery process that followed was like watching a dam break. It wasn't just the gantry camera footage they had to produce. It was hours of tape from multiple angles, including cameras from the day before that showed the other crew mishandling the very same drums. They had to hand over the keys to their own digital kingdom. The stage was now set for the most powerful moment in any investigation: the side-by-side comparison. The company's edited, narrow narrative against the full, unedited, wide-angle truth. The gavel drop was looming, and this time, it was for them. The question was no longer if the truth would come out, but how damning it would be when it did. The moment the hard drive containing the subpoenaed footage arrived at the attorney's office, the entire case pivoted. This was no longer about legal arguments, or he said they said. It was about immutable visual facts. The digital witness was finally ready to testify. The team didn't just watch the footage from the gantry camera at 10:14 a.m. They forensically reconstructed the entire timeline, starting from the previous shift. And what they found was the unequivocal, frame-by-frame annihilation of the company's narrative. The CCTV receipts were about to become the star witness. The footage from the day before showed a crew from a third-party logistics vendor hurriedly loading the pallet of solvent drums. At timestamp 16:052:18, a drum was clearly knocked over from a significant height, landing on its side with a heavy thud visible even without audio. The workers quickly righted it, glanced around, and moved on, failing to tag it as damaged or report the incident. This was the origin of the failure. The unedited truth was that the accident was a ticking time bomb, planted long before Michael Rowe even clocked in for his fateful shift. The footage from the day of the incident was even more damning. The wide-angle gantry view showed Michael's forklift approaching the storage rack. There was no reckless speed, no indication of a careless impact. He performed the standard approach. The forks slid perfectly into the pallet, and he began a smooth, controlled lift. The rupture occurred at the apex of the lift, a sudden and violent decompression that was in no way preceded by any jarring contact from the forklift itself. The company's entire case, that his improper operation caused the failure, evaporated in a single, shocking frame. The soundbite that had been a question now became a statement of fact. "Show me the footage." They showed it, and it showed everything. It showed the precise professional actions of an operator and the catastrophic failure of equipment that had been compromised by someone else's negligence. This was the core of the courtroom reckonings to come. This was the proof that could not be cross-examined, the testimony that could not be shaken. But the evidence didn't stop there. The company's own security system provided the final twist of the knife. Another camera, pointed down the main aisle, captured the safety manager and the warehouse supervisor reviewing the initial, edited cabin footage on a computer monitor just an hour after the incident. Their body language, as analyzed by an expert later retained by the defense, did not indicate shock or surprise at an employee's mistake. Instead, it showed a calm, pointed discussion. They were seen focusing on Michael's reaction, not the cause of the spill. It was a chilling glimpse into the birth of the cover-up. It demonstrated that the decision to frame Michael was not a panicked mistake, but a calculated strategy. They had the full picture available to them from the very beginning and made a conscious choice to suppress it and construct a lie. This was no longer just about a wrongful termination. This was about a deliberate attempt to defraud an employee of his legal rights. The gavel drop was now not just about justice for Michael, but about consequences for those who had orchestrated this scheme. The courtroom was a study in contrasts. On one side, the corporate legal team, with their tailored suits and binders filled with procedural arguments. On the other, Michael Rowe and his attorney, whose entire case rested on a single, powerful piece of evidence: the unedited CCTV timeline. The corporation's strategy was to drown the facts in a sea of corporate jargon, focusing on the strict, literal interpretation of safety protocols. They painted Michael as a man who cut corners. But then, it was the defense's turn. They didn't start with arguments. They started with a projector. The courtroom reckonings began not with a bang, but with the silent, damning playback of the security footage. They showed the tape from the day before, the dropped drum, the furtive glances, the failure to report. The entire narrative of a pristine workplace was shattered before a single word of testimony was spoken. The cross-examination of the company's safety manager was a masterclass in using their own evidence against them. He was asked to describe the proper procedure for handling damaged goods. He gave a textbook answer. Then he was shown the footage of the vendor crew from the day before. He was forced to admit, under oath, that the procedure was not followed. The attorney then presented the wide-angle footage of the actual incident. He was asked to point to the precise moment of Michael's alleged negligent impact. The man stammered. He could not. The video showed only a controlled lift and a spontaneous rupture. The gavel drop of reality was silencing their fiction. The corporate lawyer's objections grew more desperate. But the judge, seeing the visual evidence, allowed the line of questioning to continue. The foundation of their case was turning to dust under the cold, bright light of the unedited truth. The climax came when the defense introduced the footage of the safety manager and supervisor reviewing the footage. The attorney asked a simple, devastating question. You had this full gantry footage in your possession within an hour of the incident, correct? The manager confirmed it. And this footage clearly shows the drum rupturing without any impact from the forklift, does it not? A long pause. A quiet, it does. So, when you terminated Mr. Rowe for causing the accident through negligent operation, you knew that statement was false, didn't you? That was the moment. That was the verdict reel already spinning in the minds of everyone in the room. The corporation wasn't just wrong. They had acted in bad faith. They had knowingly and intentionally destroyed a man's livelihood to avoid a hit to their own metrics. The case code for this was no longer about an injury. It was about institutional malice. The fight was over. The only thing left was for the judge to make it official. The judge's verdict was not merely a ruling, it was a restoration. It took less than an hour for the court to return. The silence in the room so profound, you could hear the rustle of the judge's robes as he took his seat. He methodically dismantled the corporation's case, labeling their reliance on the edited footage. A gross misrepresentation of the facts and their termination of Michael Rowe. A direct act of bad faith retaliation. The gavel drop that followed was not just sound, it was substance. The verdict was for the plaintiff on all counts. Wrongful termination, failure to uphold the workers' compensation insurance covenant, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. The company was ordered to reinstate Michael with full back pay, cover all medical expenses plus future therapy, and pay significant punitive damages. A financial penalty designed to punish their misconduct and deter others. The verdict reel was a clean sweep. Justice was not just served, it was emphatic. But a court document cannot give a man back the months of stress, the sleepless nights, or the feeling of betrayal. The true victory, the moment Michael truly got his life back, came in the weeks that followed. The first was the formal letter of apology, forced by the settlement from the corporate headquarters. It was a piece of paper, but it was an admission. The second was the return to work. Walking back into that warehouse, not as a disgraced employee, but as a man vindicated by the highest authority in the land, was a psychological watershed. The whispers were now of respect, not suspicion. His case code, IN 842, became a silent legend among his colleagues. A reminder that the little guy could win. The final, most profound step in reclaiming his life was financial and psychological stability. The back pay erased the debilitating debt. The punitive damages provided a cushion, a security blanket his family had never known. It allowed his wife to breathe again. It meant he could afford the proper therapy for the knee injury and the anxiety the entire ordeal had induced. This was the ultimate outcome the court's CCTV-based verdict facilitated. It didn't just rule in his favor, it gave him the tangible means to heal and move forward. The system, when forced to function correctly by irrefutable evidence, didn't just correct a mistake. It actively rebuilt what had been broken. The corporation's attempt to make him a cautionary tale backfired spectacularly. Instead, he became a symbol. A living testament to the power of truth in a world often dominated by power and procedure. So, what is the real cost of a lie? For Michael Rowe, it was nearly everything. But for the corporation, the cost was a public, legal, and financial reckoning they never calculated. This story does more than just expose a single act of corporate cowardice. It exposes a flawed assumption they all operate under, that the truth is negotiable. This case proves it is not. The CCTV receipts are the great equalizer. They are the unblinking, unbiased arbiter in a world of spin. Hereges, Kem, ideologicamente, Atacamas are the faceless decision-makers in boardrooms who see human lives as line items, who believe their version of events will always be the one that sticks. This is a call to arms for every honest payer, every worker who clocks in and does their job right. Your diligence is your shield, but the law and the evidence are your sword. Do not let them write your story. Do not accept their narrative. Your version of the truth has value. It has power. And in the digital age, it often has a timestamp. The next time you hear about a questionable workers' comp claim, ask not just about the claimant, but about the evidence withheld. Ask to see the full picture. The real fraud isn't always the person asking for help. Sometimes, the real fraud is the entity that has the power to provide it, but chooses instead to protect itself. The system can work, but only if we demand that it does.